Spunky by Dori Brink. Are you enjoying the story so far? If you missed the other episodes, go to Reading Corner with Mrs. G and look up Spunky. We are on chapter 11. I ran through the fields until I reached the small cottage. There was a covered garbage can at the back door, which I knew would contain many treasures. I began to sniff around it. Suddenly, the door swung open and an old bent woman appeared in the doorway, squinting down at me. "What are you doing here?" she grumbled. I wagged my tail at her. "Hungry, eh?" she said. I brushed up against her leg, then sat myself down on her foot and looked up into her face. "Wait here a minute," she said, and went inside the cottage. In a few moments, she came out with a cookie in her hand. Peter and Daphne ate cookies, but they never gave me any. Daphne said it was bad for my teeth. The old woman tossed the cookie to me, and I gobbled it down. It was sweet, so delicious. I licked my lips and nudged the woman's leg with my hand. "Come inside," she said, "and I'll give you another cookie." I followed her into the cottage. Once inside, she shut the door quickly. "There now," she said. "You can stay with me and be my little doggy. You'll get all the cookies you want." My heart beat faster. The odors inside the room were stale and uninviting. My hair began to prickle my skin. I pressed the side of my body against the door and barked. "Don't you want your cookie?" the woman asked in a high-pitched voice. She reached for a cardboard box on the table and made a big fuss about taking one out. Then she dangled it over my head, moving her hand back and forth enticingly. I leaped up to get the cookie and bit her hand instead. She screamed and the cookie went flying into the air. It landed in bits on the floor. In a fury, she opened the door, her eyes wide with anger. Out I ran. "You bad dog!" she screamed after me. I ran through the fields back to our house. The path was thick with jagged bushes, and I could feel little needle points biting into my skin, but I kept running. In a little while, I reached the terrace. They were both there, Daphne in the wicker armchair reading a book, Dodger lying peacefully at her feet. I walked over to Daphne and sat down beside her chair. She continued reading, but absent-mindedly began stroking my head and back. "Ouch!" she cried and pulled her hand away. "What on earth have you gotten into?" She bent down and examined me. "You're full of stickers," she cried. "Why do you always have to bring half of California home with you?" she asked. I looked at her sideways. Could I help it if my long hair curled around twigs and leaves and pulled them from their branches? The job of picking the needle-sharp burrs out of my tangled hair was taking her a long time. When she was through with the top part of me, I lay down on my back with my paws in the air so she could do my stomach as well. "Oh, Spunky," she sighed when she saw how much more there was still left to be picked out. My thoughts drifted back to the little cottage, where the cookie was left splattered on the floor. I knew I would never go back there again. That night, after dinner, I made my first attack. I had learned a lot from Dodger. I was sprawled on my belly, trying to enjoy the aftertaste of my meal. But every few minutes, the spiteful fly whizzed by over my head, jarring me out of my uncomfortable spot. Dodger was nearby, blinking her eyes sleepily, and from time to time licking bits of crumbs from her smooth, shiny coat. Daphne and Peter were sipping coffee and talking quietly at their little table on the terrace. I waited for the right moment. It was coming toward me again. I sat up and nonchalantly scratched my ear, perfectly relaxed, as if nothing unusual was about to happen. But I watched it out of the corner of my eye. I kept my head slightly tilted to get a clear view while scratching away, pretending I was totally absorbed by my ear. There it was. I leaped into the air and struck. Down it came. I sniffed the ground until I found it, lying on its back, kicking its feet, stunned but alive. I bared my teeth and growled. It just lay there, trembling and helpless. Then I struck again. First one paw, then the other. I snarled ferociously with each heavy blow. Now I would finish it off. With a quick twist of my head, I picked it off the ground, but it got caught in my whiskers. I shook my head fitfully until it landed on the ground again. Then, with deadly accuracy, I struck with my paw, finishing its life completely. Dodger got up to inspect my work. When she saw the dead fly, she snorted her satisfaction to me. I was well pleased. Daphne and Peter were also curious to see what I had done. They leaned over, squinting down at the ground. When they saw the dead fly, they burst into laughter. "Spunky, you're a tiger," Daphne declared merrily and ruffled my coat. "Good work, Spunk," Peter said, chuckling to himself. What was so funny? They didn't laugh when Dodger made her attacks. The next evening, I spotted a cat chasing through our fields. Now I would really show them. The cat had no right to be on our territory, and the way it scurried in front of me stirred up my taste for battle. It sure could run fast, but it was no match for me. We reached the big lemon tree at the side of our house, and the cat scampered up the trunk. Now I had it. Its eyes glared down at me from the branch above. The hairs on its body were standing straight up like needles. I circled the tree, stamping my paws and barking. I stood under the branch and startled my anger, but the cat would not budge. I raised myself on my hind legs and scratched the bark with my front paws. Suddenly, the cat lunged. I felt its sharp claws pierce my nose and mouth. My cries of pain brought Dodger running from the house. The cat darted away, and Dodger followed, but she soon returned with a defeated drag to her walk. The cat was gone. When we went inside the house, Daphne took one look at me and gasped. Quickly, she brought out the medicine kit and dabbed a cotton pad coated with ointment over my wounds. I tried to squirm away from her. Dodger moaned in sympathy, but Daphne kept scolding. "Fighting with cats! You ought to know better than that. Don't you ever go near a cat again. Remember, no more cats." She was right. No more cats for me. For once, I agreed with her. But a few days later, Dodger and I were out early, running in the fields. Everything was waking up, and sunlight was just beginning to sparkle through the trees. Suddenly, Dodger stopped short, legs frozen wide apart, head thrust straight forward, tail trembling. I followed her gaze and saw it too. The cat. The memory of those sharp claws came back to me, and I had no taste to pursue it. But Dodger began to move stealthily through the bushes. Reluctantly, I followed. Now it saw us, and quickly scampered up the nearest tree. There was a hollow high up in the trunk, and the cat hid inside. She was well protected from Dodger's long reach. I backed away from the tree and made whimpering, pleading sounds in my throat, pressing against Dodger. She paid no attention to me. Her spine hairs were stiff now. Frustration was making the saliva drool down the corners of her mouth. There was no budging her, and the cat was safe. With each passing moment, Dodger grew more and more frantic, snarling and barking up at the quiet cat. Time passed. The sun was high above the mountain now. Dodger's bark was hoarse. I knew she would stay there forever if she had to. I felt helpless. I had to get her away from that tree. Her powerful muscles rippled as she stalked around it. Her thick snarls blocked out any sounds I made. I needed someone to help me, someone who could handle Dodger. Peter was at work. He could be anywhere between his trailer and all those houses being built. He would be hard to find. There was only Daphne. It would have to be Daphne. I ran all the way back to the house, taking the shortest route through the fields. Daphne was outside on the terrace, polishing the windows. She didn't notice me. I stood behind her, panting heavily, waiting. At last, she turned her head and saw me. I wagged my tail nervously, my mouth half open and dry. "Spunky, what's the matter?" she asked. I backed up a few paces and kept looking at her, my tongue dangling loosely. "What is it?" she demanded. I moved sideways, keeping my eyes on her, and tilted my head in the direction of the fields. Her face was puckered up and perplexed, but she moved toward me slowly, the polishing cloth still in her hand. I edged backward, my tail between my legs, heading toward the fields. Daphne followed me more quickly. I waved my tail and started to trot, turning my head to see if she was still behind me. She was. I ran to the dirt road leading to the fields, then took the shortcut through the thick bushes to reach Dodger faster. "Spunky!" Daphne called out. "I can't run through those bushes." I stopped short and doubled back to her. I ran ahead of her along the curving road until it thinned out and we could cut across the fields easily. When we reached the tree, Dodger was frightening to see. Her snarls had become moans, and her whole body was trembling. Daphne went up to her. "What have you got up there, Dodger?" she asked. Dodger stared up at the hollow. "A cat!" Daphne exclaimed. Dodger whined loudly and pressed up against her. Daphne watched Dodger thoughtfully for a moment. Then, with a firm, quick grasp, she took hold of Dodger's collar. "Home," she ordered. Dodger whimpered and tugged at her collar, but Daphne held firm. "Come on, back to the house." Still whimpering but obedient to Daphne's command, Dodger trotted beside her back along the dirt road. I followed behind them. Glancing back at the tree, I saw the cat leap out of the hollow and dart away through the fields. What a relief to see it go. Suddenly, I realized I had done something I had never thought possible. I had asked Daphne for help, and she had understood what I wanted. A feeling of happiness seemed to lift me off the ground as I trotted behind them. I did not take the shortcut through the fields. Dodger and I could not understand Daphne at times. All the wonderful things we enjoyed, like rattlesnakes, skunks, or wild mice that visit our house once in a while, made her shiver, gasp, or scream. Once I found a dead rattlesnake lying on the road to our house, but I knew better than to bring it home. Daphne would only scream. But Dodger had the worst time of it, especially with the birds. Every now and then, a bird would fly straight into the glass doors overlooking the terrace. It would fall to the ground stunned. Dodger loved when this happened. It was almost impossible to catch a bird in flight. Her hunting instincts were well satisfied when she could grab a falling bird between her teeth, as long as Daphne wasn't around. Late one afternoon, Daphne was out on the terrace with us. A bird flew into the window and fell to the ground. Dodger lunged forward and made the grab. "No, no!" Daphne screamed. Dodger looked up, bewildered, but obediently dropped the bird from her mouth. Her self-control truly amazed me. Daphne picked up the still bird and brought it into the house. We followed her. Inside the kitchen, she filled an eyedropper with water and squeezed a few drops into the bird's beak. Then she made a bed for it of soft cotton stuffed into a shoebox. She put it on a high shelf in the kitchen and waited. It wasn't long before the bird started to flap its wings. Daphne took the box outside, lifted out the bird, and put it on one of the branches of the lemon tree. After watching it for a time, she went back into the house. Dodger and I waited to see if the bird would fly away. It sat still for a long time. Then it started to wobble a bit. It finally tumbled off the branch down to the ground. Dodger made the grab. She looked around carefully, the bird between her teeth, to make sure Daphne was still inside. Then she carried the bird to the far side of the house and dug a hole in the ground with her paws. When it was deep enough, she dropped the dead bird into the hole and scratched loose dirt over it. Daphne came outside again to inspect the tree branch, and Dodger ran up to her with a big smile on her face. "Where's the bird?" Daphne asked pleasantly. Dodger was thoroughly fooled. She ran to the side of the house and dug up the bird. then proudly trotted back to Daphne with a dead bird between her teeth. Daphne screamed. I thought Dodger would never learn. Tune in next time for Chapter 13.